80 years ago on February 17, 1936, the first Phantom newspaper strip was published. The Phantom has been in continuous publication since then, and has appeared also in films, television series, cartoons, and video games. While the character is immensely popular internationally, many who should be fans either aren't aware of or unfairly dismiss the character, perhaps because it isn't published by any of the major comic book houses like Marvel or DC. In this video, we'll explore the character and his origins, how he was instrumental in the creation of your favorite comic book characters, and his publishing history, both the original canon and licensed stories. Before the Marvel Universe, before Batman, before even Superman, there was the Phantom. First published on February 17, 1936. In many ways, the Phantom set the template for all comic book superheroes that followed, most notably Superman and Batman. Many of the things they did, the Phantom was the OG who created it. In terms of character design, the Phantom was the first to wear a skin-tight leotard. He was also first to wear shorts on top of said leotard, a look inspired by the circus strongmen at the time, as well as boots and a distinctive belt. He was also the first to feature a mask with pure white eyes, inspired by Greek statues, a look that gave them an unnatural and timeless appearance. Finally, he was the first hero to take on a will not kill moral code. The Phantom's origin story began in the 1500s with Christopher Standish, the former protege of Christopher Columbus and later a captain in his own right. His commerce vessel was attacked by pirates of the Sang Brotherhood, killing Standish and his entire crew, with only his son Kit surviving. Kit was washed ashore on the coast of Bengala, where he was helped by the Bandar tribe. The Bandar themselves were subjugated by the rival Wasaka tribe. Seeing a resemblance between himself and an idol of the feared Wasaka deity, Kit made and donned a costume that made him look like the idol had come to life, and preyed on the Wasaka superstitions in order to free the Bandar from the Wasaka rule. Kit stayed with the Bandar, and on the skull of his father's murderer, he swore the oath that he would devote his life to fight piracy in all its forms, and that his sons would follow him. The tradition would go on from father to son in an unbroken link. Yet only the Bandar and a select few would know this secret. Outwardly, it would look like the same man, a man who could not die. While in peak physical condition, the Phantom has no superhuman powers or abilities, and no James Bond-like gadgets. The greatest weapon in the Phantom's arsenal is his cunning, and the legend surrounding him. A legend he is not above employing theatrics and trickery to maintain and take advantage of. The current Phantom, the one primarily featured in the comics, is Kit Walker, the 21st Phantom. The Phantom was not inspired by any earlier comic book hero, as he was the first of his kind. The Phantom's roots and inspirations instead come from theater, classic literature, history, myths, legends, current events, and the pop literature of the time, most notably Zorro, Tarzan, and Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. Since The Phantom was published as a daily newspaper strip rather than in comic book form, writer Lee Falk had a creative freedom in giving his Phantom stories a length and story complexity far beyond what the writers of later comic books could only dream about. The Phantom's inspirations from literature and pulp stories are clearly felt, as the early stories read more as the adventure and mystery novelettes of the time with some classical influx, rather than the more mainstream comic books that would follow. Yet the stories contain plot twists and turns which would later become comic book tropes. As such, the Phantom is a transitional character between the pulp era and the comic book era. The Phantom's creator, Lee Falk, born in 1911, had already had success with his first comic book strip, Mandrake the Magician, when he started writing The Phantom in 1936. Falk's original plan was to only dabble in comic strips for a couple of years, in order to support himself while he tried to break into theater. That was where his true passion lied. Falk was actually highly successful in this endeavor. Over the course of his career, he would run 5 theaters, produce 300 plays, direct 100, and write 12, 2 of which were musicals. He would also work with some very high-profile names, including Charlton Heston, Paul Newman, and Marlon Brando. However, despite his success in the theater, Lee Falk enjoyed writing the Phantom so much he could never leave the character behind, and he continued writing Phantom stories non-stop from when he conceived the character in 1936 up until his death 63 years later on March 13, 1999. On his deathbed, hooked to a respirator, he told his wife how the most recently started Phantom stories would end, so she could finish them after his death. Few creators have ever shown such care and passion for their creations as Lee Falk did. Today, the Phantom strip continues on, written by Tony DePaul of Egmont fame. But we'll get back to that. The era in which Lee Falk wrote the Phantom can largely be divided into two, separated by the artists who drew the comic strip. The first period, the Moore-McCoy years, ran from 1936 to 1961, when the comic strip was first drawn by Raymond Moore and later by Wilson McCoy. While these stories are excellent in their own right, they are a product of their time and contain elements which some modern readers might find objectionable. Also, despite the presence of the clearly African Bandar tribe, the country of Bengala was located in Asia, and the stories for the most part were set in various places in the Far East. The second period, the Cy Barry years, lasted from 1961 to 1994 or 1999, if you choose to include Oleson and Williams, who did the art for 5 years between Cy Barry's retirement and Lee Falk's death. The second period is significant in that for all intents and purposes, it rebooted the first and updated the Phantom to the form we know him today. It also moved the country of Bengala and its surroundings from Asia to Africa. The publishing side distinguishes the Phantom from the more mainstream superheroes in that the character isn't owned by any of the major comic book houses such as Marvel or DC. Instead, the Phantom is owned by King Features Syndicate, a company which distributes comic strips, editorial cartoons, and more to nearly 5,000 newspapers worldwide. King Features Syndicate is in turn a subsidiary of the Hearst Company, which was founded by William Randolph Hearst, on whom the fictional character of Charles Foster Kane was based, meaning that the Phantom's ultimate owner was the real-life Citizen Kane. The Phantom comic strip has been in continuous publication since its debut in 1936. The strip still appears today in hundreds of newspapers daily. At its peak, the strip was read by 100 million people every day. The Phantom comic strip has been released in a variety of collected editions all over the world. Over the years, King Features have also licensed the character to many other publishers. Marvel, DC, and Moonstone, among others, have published their versions of the Phantom, which have run parallel to Lee Falk's canon newspaper strip. Internationally, the Phantom has an even greater appeal than in the US, most notably in Australia and in the Nordic countries. Within each of these, the Phantom is also published in a standalone magazine, which has been in continuous print for longer than any and all Marvel and DC heroes, which it also outsells by a wide margin. The character's international popularity has led to original Phantom stories being made outside of the US too. One example being famed Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini, who himself made new and unlicensed Phantom strips in the style of Lee Falk and artist Raymond Moore, when dictator Benito Mussolini had banned the original strip in Italy during World War II. The most notable international publisher, however, is Egmont, which has made original and licensed stories for the Nordic market for decades. Unlike other licensed stories, the Egmont stories didn't contradict the canon Lee Falk stories, but are built around and expand upon them. For example, a significant chunk of the Egmont stories tell the adventures of the earlier 20 Phantoms that came before the current one, whom most of Lee Falk's stories concern. While made for the Nordic market, the Egmont stories are reprinted in other territories as well, such as Australia. But Egmont does more than that. After Lee Falk's death in 1999, King Features Syndicate hired Egmont to take the reins on the Phantom newspaper strip, which they do to this day. In addition to newspaper strips and comic books, the Phantom has also appeared in other media, such as a 1943 serial, the animated series Defenders of the Earth, the animated series Phantom 2040, and video games based upon the character. The most famous, however, is probably the 1996 feature film starring Billy Zane. Check out Andre's analysis and retrospective review of it here on Midnight's Edge.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit subscribe so you can catch all of our upcoming videos. For more podcasts, news, and reviews, check us out at midnightsedge.net and follow us on Twitter at midnightsedge. Also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/midnightsedge.